Welcome to Dreamy Tales, your bedtime haven. Prepare to embark on a journey of tranquility and relaxation. I'm here to weave enchanting stories that will gently guide you into a restful night's sleep. Subscribe and let the soothing whispers of Dreamy Tales be your nightly companion. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Chapter 1. A Princess in the Forest. Deep in the forest realm, behind walls of stone, stood a shining castle of ivory and gold. Here lived a beautiful queen, vain and proud, who spent her mornings gazing upon her reflection. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And the magic mirror would always reply, "You, my queen, are fairest of all." One day, as the queen primped before her mirror, she heard faint music drifting up from the castle gardens below. Curious, she crept to her window and peered down into the lush greenery. There, singing to the birds, was her stepdaughter, Snow White. But as the queen watched Snow White twirl and dance, she gasped. The magic mirror spoke true no longer. Snow White's raven locks and rose-petal lips outshone even the fairest queen. "No!" screamed the queen. "I must be fairest." Jealousy and vanity consumed her heart. She rushed from her chambers, with murder in her eyes, down secret stone steps, and out into the garden's shade. Snow White froze at the cruel sight of her stepmother. But before she could flee, the queen grabbed Snow White's wrist with sharp talon nails. "You will sing no more, dear Snow," hissed the queen. Snow White trembled, but did not cry. Just then, a huntsman passed through the garden on his daily rounds. Spying the commotion, he demanded the queen unhand the princess at once. With a scowl, the vain queen released Snow White, but her hatred had only begun. That night, as Snow White sobbed alone in her chamber, the queen hatched a plan. She summoned the huntsman to the castle dungeons, where rats scurried in the dark. "You will take Snow White into the deepest, darkest wood," croaked the queen, "and there you will slay her, bringing back her heart in this jeweled box as proof of the deed. Only then may you leave this castle, never to return." The huntsman shook his head sadly, but he dared not refuse a direct order from the queen. At dawn, he knocked softly on Snow White's door. "Come, princess. I am commanded to escort you into the forest for picking berries and flowers. Do not be afraid." Snow White, though wary of the queen, trusted the kind huntsman and followed him out of the castle gates. They walked for hours beneath the dense forest canopy until finally the trees began to thin. The huntsman stopped and turned to Snow White with tears in his eyes. "I cannot do what she has commanded. You must flee now, into the deepest part of the woods, where even I cannot find you again. May the forest spirits protect you, dear Snow White. Now run." Snow White threw her arms around the huntsman, then turned and ran as fast as her little legs could carry her into the unknown wilderness. She did not look back, for she knew if the queen discovered her betrayal, the huntsman's life would be forfeit. As the trees swallowed Snow White whole, the huntsman wept and prayed for her safety from the vain queen's wrath. Thus began Snow White's quest to escape her stepmother's jealousy and find refuge from the darkness that now pursued her through the forest realm. Chapter 2. A Cottage in the Woods. Snow White ran until her sides ached and her breath came in ragged gasps. As night fell, shadows gathered thick among the ancient tree trunks. Snow White grew frightened in the deep, dancing gloom. She scrambled up a mossy embankment and collapsed in a clearing of soft grass. Stars began to peek out one by one above the rustling treetops, As Snow White lay gazing at their glittering light, a strange glow caught her eye coming from beyond the trees. She crept closer quietly until a tiny cottage emerged, glowing warmly in the dark wood. But this was no ordinary cottage. Its walls and roof were crafted entirely of gingerbread. Iced window panes featured lattices of spun sugar. Marzipan moldings trimmed every eave and shutter. Snow White's tummy rumbled at the delightful scents wafting from within. She dared herself to knock on the gingerbread door, hoping to find shelter just for the night. No one answered, so Snow White tried the handle, which turned easily in her hand. "Hello?" her small voice called into the cozy interior. "Is anyone home?" The floors, walls, and furnishings inside were made of different sweets: fudge, toffee, licorice, taffy. In the middle of the room, a humble table sat, laid with 7 teeny place settings. Snow White's eyes grew wide, wondering whose home this could be. That's when she heard a rumbling sound approaching outside, like a stone cart pulling up heavy loads. Voices carried through the gingerbread walls, grumpy, happy, bashful, sleepy voices just outside. Snow White backed away from the cottage door in surprise as 7 little men tramped inside, their worn boots caked with mud. "Well, look who we have here, brothers," cried the one with rosy cheeks and a pointed hat. "It's a little girl. Hello there, what's your name?" Snow White curtsied bravely. "I am Snow White. I got lost in the forest and found your interesting home. I hope you don't mind me waiting inside. I was just so hungry and curious." The dwarfs all smiled kindly at the princess except one with a grumpy frown. "Well, don't just stand there. Help us wash up for supper," said the dwarf called Happy. And so, Snow White's new life in the enchanted forest began among the company of 7 dwarf miners: Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Bashful, Sneezy, Sleepy, and Dopey. In exchange for keeping their candy cottage clean and cooking their meals, the dwarfs agreed Snow White could stay as long as she liked, protected from her stepmother's wicked threats. Snow White sang as she worked, and her light restored the dwarfs' fractured spirits. Though small they may have been, the 7 dwarfs were the first to bring Snow White happiness after escaping into the dark wood. Chapter 3: A Wicked Disguise. One morning while cleaning the dwarf's cottage, Snow White heard screams echoing from deep within the forest. Rushing outside, she followed the terrible sounds until coming upon a flock of songbirds all aflutter in a circle of trees. Their wings beat against an unseen terror at the treetop heights. Snow White called up to ask what frightened them so. "An evil crone climbs our branches, stealing our eggs and scaring off our mates," cried the birds. Curious and brave, Snow White began climbing the rough bark to investigate. Just then, a crack split the air and the topmost boughs shook. Snow White nearly lost her grip. When she reached the treetop, a haggard old peddler woman balanced precariously among the waving limbs. Her clothes were tattered rags, the color of dirt. A gnarled cane and wicker basket swung from her gnarled hands. "Well, hello there, pretty girl," croaked the crone. "Care for an apple? I've the finest, reddest fruits in all the land." Snow White knew better than to accept gifts from strangers in the forest. "I think you should leave these birds in peace, madam," she replied politely. The crone merely cackled and began her craggy descent. "Suit yourself, Snow Girl, but one bite of my apple and all your cares would melt away." An icy finger traced Snow White's spine at the crone's parting words. She quickly scrambled down to reassure the songbirds all was well now. But even as she comforted them, Snow White couldn't help wondering at the strange encounter. Who was that scary woman, and why did apples seem to be her business? That evening, while preparing supper, Snow White's thoughts lingered on the exchange. She barely heard the dwarfs arriving home from the mines until Grumpy shouted, "Well, don't just stand there dreaming, girl. Feed us." Snow White snapped out of her daze and hastened to serve their meal. Over bowls of hot stew, she recounted the day's odd event in the forest. "Mark my words, that peddler is no good," warned Grumpy. "Best steer clear if you see her again." The others nodded agreement as they slurped their supper. Just then, 3 sharp knocks sounded at the gingerbread door. Snow White answered to find the crone peddler waiting with a toothy grin. "I said you didn't want one of my apples earlier, but now, with night falling, maybe you've changed your mind?" From her basket, she lifted the most perfect red apple Snow White had ever seen. Its flesh glistened as if with droplets of dew. Before she knew what came over her, Snow White reached out and accepted the forbidden fruit. Chapter 4. A Beautiful Sleep. Snow White took a small, delicate bite of the crimson apple. Its sweet juice burst onto her tongue like sunlight. A sensation of blissful calm stole through her whole being. What strange magic is this? Snow White wondered dreamily. All at once her vision blurred as the apple slipped from numb fingers. The dwarfs jumped up in alarm, but their cries seemed muffled and far away. Snow White collapsed into a snowdrift of soft cotton as darkness folded over her. The last thing she saw was the peddler crone cackling hideously before fleeing into the gathering night. When Snow White woke, all was still and cold. She couldn't feel her fluttering heart or breath in her chest. Panic seized her paralyzed form. She was trapped within her skin, yet seen no more by living eyes. The dwarfs returned from the mines to find Snow White lay perfect as a porcelain doll, yet no fire burned behind her eyes. They wept enormous tears, stunned by this twist of doom. For days, the dwarfs kept mournful watch, refusing to bury their beloved friend under stony earth. Her lambent skin glowed pale blue as moonlight on new snow. After a week passed, the dwarfs' tears finally ran dry. All hope had fled that Snow White might wake once more. "We must lay her to rest before her beauty fades," croaked miserable Grumpy. Together, the dwarfs fashioned a crystal coffin more lovely than any queen's sarcophagus. Into this lucid bier, they gently placed Snow White's still form, clasping her hands in prayer across her breast. One last, lingering kiss upon her brow, then solemnly they bore the casket to a glade where bluebells and wood sorrel grew. Here, they interred Snow White beneath a dome of delicate stained glass. Her eternal repose was as lovely as a woodland dream. While the dwarfs took solace that Snow White remained nearby, a deeper grief took root in their hearts. For who would wake their princess from this cursed enchantment? Only true love's first kiss could break the spell. But alone in the forest, what chance had a princess locked in crystal to find her heart's desire? All seemed lost in the enchanted woods of the vanished season. Chapter 5. A Charming Discovery. Spring's return awakened new hope in the magical forest realm. Green buds swelled on every branch as birdsong sweetened the sighing breeze. One sunny morn, a noble prince ventured from his castle far across the hills. He loved nothing more than exploring woodland glades in search of fairy tales come true. That day, the prince's steed carried him deep into a lush grove he'd never seen before. As they walked, a shimmer caught his eye through breaks in the leafy veil. Curious, he dismounted and parted the veil to find a marvel beyond imagining. Nestled in a mossy glade was an enchanted glass coffin holding the most beautiful princess he had ever beheld. She lay as if asleep, hands folded serenely at her breast. Raven locks framed her alabaster face and cheeks like rose petals. Though motionless, an otherworldly grace possessed her. The prince knelt in awe, scarce daring to breathe, lest this vision dissolve like mist. Gently, he traced a finger along her smooth cheek, shuddering at an emotion welling in his breast, hitherto unknown. "Who are you, lovely maiden, and what sorcery holds you thus?" he whispered. Leaning in, he brushed his lips softly against hers, overcome by an urge to rouse this secret glade's silent siren from her deep slumber. No sooner had their lips met than the princess gasped and opened wide eyes the shade of new spring leaves. She looked around in wonder, then up at the prince with dawning recognition in her gaze. "You've broken the spell," she smiled, sitting up lightly. "Oh, thank you, kind sir, for awakening me." The prince grasped her hands, dumbfounded by joy. "My beauty, I am overjoyed. Won't you tell me your name?" "I am called Snow White," she replied. At that, memories flooded back of her stepmother's malice and refuge with the dwarfs in the wood. Yet this prince's kiss had triumphed where all others failed. Snow White's heart swelled with gratitude and curiosity about her savior. He gathered her arm in his, guiding her from the glade. "My name is Prince Florian. Come, Snow White. Your long exile in this enchanted wood is over. I shall escort you in safety to my kingdom beyond the forest, there to dwell in peace for all your days." Hand in hand, they walked beneath the warming sun to begin life anew. Chapter 6. Happily Ever After. Snow White and Prince Florian rode through the forest together, leaving behind the glass coffin glade forevermore. Birdsong accompanied them as flowers bloomed in the verdant canopy above. At last, they emerged into rolling hills, glowing gold in the sun's soft light. On the horizon, spires and walls of white stone rose from a castle town nestled in a green valley. As they approached the castle gates, citizens poured out cheering to welcome their prince home. When they spied Snow White at his side, fairer than any had seen, whispers spread like a summer breeze. At the feast that evening, Prince Florian announced his intent to take Snow White as his bride and princess of the realm. Her kindness and beauty had captured his heart in the enchanted wood. Days passed in joyous preparation for the wedding. Snow White wrote a letter to the dwarfs, describing all that transpired, hoping they took comfort she was safe and loved. On the morning of her nuptials, Snow White stood gazing out a tower window dressed in regal silks, the color of moonlight, when a dark shadow crossed the land. Black clouds boiled on the horizon, and a chill wind picked up. Snow White's blood turned to ice, for she recognized an evil magic upon the air. Just then, 3 sharp knocks came at her chamber door. Slowly she turned, dreading who might enter. There framed in the doorway stood the crone peddler, though now her rags were gone. Beneath a ornate black robe and tall hat beat the heart of Snow White's stepmother, the vain and wicked queen. "Your prince can shield you no longer, Snow Girl," cackled the queen. "This kingdom shall be mine, as you are now beyond its bounds." From her sleeve slid a jeweled dagger glittering with venomous intent. Snow White backed against the window in terror, as below the people screamed and fled from descending wraiths. Her stepmother lunged with knife arched to strike, when suddenly an arrow buzzed through the open casement. It caught the queen between her crazed eyes, felling her where she stood. Snow White whirled to see Prince Florian lowering his longbow, accompanied by 7 weary yet determined dwarfs. Together they had followed Snow White's letter and arrived just in time. "You shall not claim another victim this day, witch," growled fierce Grumpy, kicking her fallen form. The invading darkness broke like a spell under the dwarf's stout courage. All was set right once more in the realm. Later that sunny eve, Snow White wed her prince before crowds cheering their union, with the dwarfs standing proud as family. From that day forth, Snow White and Prince Florian ruled their kingdom with wisdom, justice, and compassion. The memory of Snow White's stepmother faded, while her enduring spirit of kindness lived on for all children of the realm, and they lived happily ever after. The end. As the stars twinkle above, it's time for Dreamy Tales to bid you good night. May the soothing echoes of our stories linger in your dreams, offering you a serene escape. Until we meet again under the moonlit sky, sleep tight and sweet dreams.